Hey, what's up? Hello, Grief Sense Familia. How we doing today? If you don't already know what the movement is about, it's about normalizing grief sense. What does that mean? That means normalizing conversations around death. And we do that through holding space to talk about loss, confronting our mortality. And we also do this through the lens of social justice, creative expression, community care, as well as pop culture. So as you interact with these episodes, please reflect on how grief sense shows up in your life. And if you have a story that you'd like to share with us, please feel free to reach out. You can reach us at info@griefsense.com via email. Now with that, hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Welcome, listeners of Grief Sense, the podcast experience. I am honored to have my very first guest on the show, a very good friend of mine, Noel Claudio. And he has an inspiring story to share with you all. I want to just share some brief information as to how I met Noel. We met a few months ago, actually, on LinkedIn, and he is killing it on there with his content, with sharing his story. And I just thought he would be a really great podcast guest because his story really resonates with the Grief Sense message. Noel, would you please be able to give us a brief bio about yourself and what you do?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, I'm honored and thank you for having me as a guest on this platform, and very excited to hear all of the various stories of such amazing people who have, just like us, gone through loss in their lives, and also hearing how they've overcome it and the inspiration behind it for others who are going to go through similar things, because we all know that at some point we're not going to be here forever, and loss is a part of life. So as you mentioned, very happy as well to have gotten to know you and meet you through a platform like LinkedIn. Um, my quick background and story is I'm originally from Puerto Rico, República Dominicana, so PR and DR. But I was raised in the city of Philadelphia for the majority of my life. I grew up in the hood, basically in Philly. Had to really go through a lot of different struggles, and my parents were such a big part of my life, and my childhood and all the memories. Um, I'm first generation Latino as well in the community. I currently work in the technology space as a program manager at a tech company, but previously had time as well as a consultant and also as a strategy and operations manager in multiple different companies like Deloitte, Slalom, Twitter. And I'm just, someone young in my career who's just trying to similarly make it in life. And I think sometimes life moves so fast that we forget to take some time to stop and remember the things that we go through, the things that we have gone through, and the things that are going to continue to be there for us for the rest of our lives. And grief is such a big part of that.
100,000%. And I am proud to be a fellow Dominican out here. Shout out to all
Let's
the
go.
Dominicans out there. Pa'lante, si se puede, all of the things. All right, so let's jump in. So each episode, I like to start with honoring our loved ones, just because I think it's very important to keep our loved ones' memories alive. It's often that after someone passes away, that's it. People don't check on you
Mm.
sometimes, and sometimes we have birthdays, we have their anniversaries, right? Like those days can be really tough. And so I think it's very important to keep our loved ones' memories alive because people don't understand how hard it is and how important it is to keep their legacy alive and thriving. So I'd like to ask you, is there anyone that you would like to honor today? I ask that you share their names if you're comfortable. And then after that, we'll transition into your grief story.
Yeah, there's a few people that I'd like to shout out. I would start first by shouting out my my mother and father, Dulce Rodriguez, my dad, Jesus Claudio, my nephew, Darnell Jesus Baez Claudio, one of my really good friends from my early days at Penn State, Tim Hurling, and my grandmother, Doña Gloria. There's also so many more people that I'm leaving out specifically by name, but to all of my family members, both dead and alive, to my ancestors, to everyone who's going through hard struggles right now in my community and my friends who have lost their parents and family members as well. Just
Mm.
shout out to all of you for those who are looking down on us. Uh, Major shout out for keeping us alive spiritually. Every day that we walk, there's not a moment that I don't remember each and every one of the special people in my lives. And for those around me as well, we're also experiencing loss, knowing that, we're all in this together and it's natural and it's a part of life and we're going to be here to support one another.
I love that. That was so beautiful. And I am just sending you love always and always for all of the loss that you've experienced. Um, so how would you say that this experience has shaped you, and how have you maybe found the courage and the strength to move forward? Because sometimes experiencing loss is devastating. Sometimes I call them grief days. Some days just sneak up on you. One day you have everything together, and then the next day you can't get out of bed. So how has this shaped you, and how do you find the strength to move forward?
That's a great question. And even just to give more context, I've been through a lot of things that sometimes I even forget because it's happened in such quick moments, such a blur, because you try to blur it out sometimes just because it's natural, those feelings. And for me, as a kid, I was very self-aware about death. Like, I know that we're not meant to be here forever. You learn that through watching shows on TV, storytelling, and so much more. But I didn't necessarily experience that until probably 2011 when I lost my father unexpectedly in my sophomore year of college. And for me, that was a very, very hard moment to process because it's the first time that I saw someone that was in my very immediate family just leave this world, and someone who's so important. And for many of us in our community, especially the Latino community, the Black community, and others, right? Like, we pride ourselves so much on family. And if you're someone like me, I'm the first in my family to go to college, like, a lot of
Yeah.
what I was doing was for my parents, and it was for my dad. It was to make him proud and all of these things, right? And
Mm,
that hit hard because I knew he wasn't going to be there. I knew he wasn't going to be standing at my graduation in person and seeing all that I promised him that I was going to do. And that also hit my mother very hard. I still remember it like it was yesterday because for me, it was a windy, coldish night, October 13th, 2011, where my mom and my dad simply just left because they just wanted to play the lottery, honestly. They wanted to just drive off to a bodega, a corner store not too far away. And my dad came back. I was not in the car. I was at home with my younger brother who was sleeping. Um, I actually was studying for an exam the next day in school.
mm,
So I was in my dad's room and he had left. And that same day, I found a lot of weird things happening. Like, my dad was asking me questions like, "Hey, like, so what are you going to do with your career? Like, what do you want to accomplish?" Like, questions that he never really was asking
mm.
like every single day, but that day he was bringing those questions up, and we had great
Wow.
conversations and everything. And he left that night, and he came back, suffering an asthma attack while he was driving, and he had already some conditions with his lungs and such from smoking. And that was pretty much the end. He parked the car. My mom was devastated, and I still remember, like yesterday, like the screams, how much agony and pain my mom was in, and then it started to hit me, and it started to hit my younger brother at that time, and then from
Mm,
there it was go mode, right? It was just really just processing what had just happened
wow.
in life. And 2 years after that moment, in 2013, I lost my nephew to leukemia. He was only 17 years old.
Oh my
And that
goodness.
was another eye-opening experience for me because it also, for the longest time, I kept saying, okay, well, people who are older, they're naturally going to pass away. I didn't see it happening for someone that young and someone who was
Mhm.
around my age group at the time. And to see that happen too, it just hit me hard that, nothing is guaranteed in life and we need to enjoy our moments as much as it can be. And the last two, and I'll wrap up here, is 2017, about 6 years after my dad passed away. Then I ended up losing my grandmother first in Dominican Republic, who really was the queen of the family, especially to my mom. My mom would call her every single day, did so much for her
Right.
growing up in Dominican Republic and then coming as an immigrant to Philadelphia in the U.S. And then 6 months after that, my mom ended up passing away. And my mom was only 51 years old at the
Um,
time, and she ended up suffering a heart attack. And she had also some heart conditions, which were growing over the years. Very unexpectedly, she was sleeping. We just woke up the next day, and that's how I ended up finding her. But uh, those 4 moments for me were really, really big. And
yeah.
I haven't even mentioned my good friend Tim, who I shouted out earlier. I
Yeah.
learned about his death about a year afterwards because I just didn't know what had happened to him. And we didn't talk for a while. Very good college friend of mine, trusted me a ton. And he ended up, unfortunately, passing away, and I haven't talked to his family or anything since. But it's a pretty dark story, and I know he was going through a lot as well. So
Yeah.
I know that was a long way to answer all of this, but I just wanted to
Yep.
make sure I'd share as much as possible.
No, I thank you so much for sharing that. Of course, these conversations will strike emotion. I'm trying to hold back my tears back here because you sharing your story is a true testament that people from our communities, we don't just lose one person. It's always a cluster of people that we lose, whether it's in a short amount of time or, over time. But it's never just one person. And I think it's so important to talk about that because it's really hard to process your grief for one person, let alone another. And so I don't know if you ever experienced this, but in my world, it's like it's hard to just grieve one person. It almost feels like if I am having a tough grief day, I'm kind of mourning and grieving everybody. It's not just one person. And so I just got goosebumps when you shared the individual stories, but of course, as a collective, just losing that many people, um, people who were close to you and had such a profound impact on your life. And I can only imagine the role that you played in their lives, and how you made their life so beautiful before they transitioned. So I want to thank you for sharing that and being so open. And I think that a lot of people will, resonate with that and relate to what you shared. Um, so with that, how do you find the strength in moving forward? And you know what? I don't even like the term moving forward because you never really move forward with this. I think grief is one of those things that it just integrates with your life if you let it. You can work against it or you can work with it. And I think something that I've always seen in you, and this is honestly why I wanted you on the show, is because I see, the term I've coined grief sense show up in your life where even though you have suffered these traumatic losses and experiences, you still find a way to push through and help other people along your journey. Even if it's not directly through grief and talking about grief, just who you are in your story. And so, what are some of the ways, if you're comfortable sharing, on how you push through with everything?
Well, I think everyone should, including myself, when you're ready, take time to actually pursue therapy, mental health
Yes.
experts. And by no means am I saying this and I myself need to go, right? Like, but I'm not an expert in this.
Yeah.
However, I can speak on my experiences, and I have multiple experiences because there's the experience of me grieving my father, and then there's the experience of me never having my mother be the same ever again since that moment. And then
Mm,
living with my mother for like 6 years until she passed away. And then going through the cycle all over again and then grieving her. So there
mm,
were multiple layers there, and it gets
yeah.
very complicated because there's the feelings of like, I lost my dad and what he meant to the family and to me personally and to my brother and to everyone. then really losing my mom even at that point a little bit too, because while she was physically alive, spiritually, like she was devastated. She went through a ton of depression, lots of therapy. She was never really the same from that moment for 6 years. And having
Mhm.
to, as a kid, and as a son to be and I mean, I wasn't a kid, but I felt like a kid always with under my
Yeah,
mom, and like just
sure.
being there and having to see her go through those emotions and then be there for her. And then when
Yeah.
she was gone, it was like, well, now both of my parents are gone. Now I'm an adult orphan, and that's an entirely different experience that I'm going through right now. I think there are ways that I find to um, cope with it, and one of those ways is actually through to storytelling, keeping their memories alive, and that
Yep.
involves content creation like platforms like LinkedIn and others where I can share my story. That involves meeting with people who have also gone through similar experiences like mine and finding a common ground there. That involves
Yeah.
being on podcasts like this, like Grief Sense, where like I can share like this story more publicly to everyone. And I've always found writing something very interesting, and I'm not much of a video person per se, but like I do like writing things down, and that's something I have in common with my mom and my dad, who both were writers too, in their own respective ways. And yeah, I just recommend for people who are going through the same, just like
Yep.
remember that there's a community, that you're not alone. I forgot to also mention, I do like to go to the gym a lot too. So weightlifting was something
Mhm.
I just started doing, take all my
Definitely.
anger out
Yeah.
after I lost my father. And then now I continue to do that. So even as I age, like whenever I'm angry, pissed off, whatever emotion, I'm like, let me go to the gym and let me take it out there. And that's been one way I've been coping with it too.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And you know, I love what you said about writing. I think that's always how I've kind of expressed myself or grappled with my grief or just like honestly make sense of anything at all. I just like I got to write it down. It's not real if it's not written down for calendar reminders, but let alone like grief and just kind of storytelling
Yeah.
around that. Um, but I love what you said about content creation because I think that, a lot of people don't realize what goes into content creation. Like it's a whole job on top of the job you already have, I'm sure. Um, but with that, can you talk a little bit about and maybe there is no relation, maybe there is, but would you say that your grief or your experience with loss has you know, impacted your choice of career? Or, how have you seen your losses impact how you approach your career? Because from my perspective, I love that you always talk about being a first gen, and talking about what it means to be a first gen person in the workplace and inspiring other people that are also first gen. But then you go into the nitty gritty of what it's like to be in your career. And I think that's so helpful because a lot of people don't know that. You go to school and then you're kind of thrown in the water of sharks. Start your career, do what you have to do and people like you with your content creation, you're really making it easy and breaking it down for other people. So that's just something I've picked up. But, is there anything else that you'd like to share on that?
Yeah, I think that, we all have the ability to create content, and I think it's within everyone. It's a matter of your perspective, how you do it, the
Yep.
platform you want to use, the stories you want to tell. When we
Mhm.
were kids, we were shown stories, we were told to write essays, we were told to do so many things around really explaining how you feel and
Mm,
why this is this way and what we would do differently. And I think like those aspects all apply to like, content creation. I think for me personally, the only thing that I'm doing different and my different spin to it is, being first generation, first of all, is really hard. Right?
mhm.
Like you're the first. It's not just your first year family to go to college. It could also be the first in a new country, right? It could be
Mhm.
the first in really just so many aspects of life. And when you're the first, there's already a ton of pressure on you, and you hold that pressure
Oh
to
my
heart.
God. Yeah.
So tying this into grief, to what
Yeah.
I was mentioning earlier, not only was I raised with that pressure that I needed to, even if my parents never told me this directly, I still always felt that way. It's like, well, my dad was a landscaper, my mom was a stay-at-home mother. We grew up poor, but I will say it didn't feel like we were poor. We were poor
Right.
in the eyes of everyone else. If you want to take a look at government numbers and things like that, sure, we were classified as poor, but to us, we had all the necessities, at least growing up, because my parents made sure of that. But to
Beautiful.
them, right, like I knew I had to do something different. So that's what pushed me into wanting to go and study tech and pursue a tech career and all of these things. And early on, one of the things that I did was for 6 years I spent in the consulting world right out of
Mm.
college. I used to travel a ton. I used to work at Deloitte Consulting, an amazing firm, very well known, Big Four, had clients like all over the country. But let me tell you, one of the biggest moments from that time that I still have not gotten over a process was when I lost my mother in 2017 in December 28th, which was 3 days after Christmas, by the way, which was
Yeah.
even harder to process.
My goodness.
I that From that moment on, my head was not straight for whatever I did the next, I don't know, six,
How
eight
can they? Oh
months
my
to a
goodness.
year.
Mhm.
So at that point in time, I was on a project where I was traveling to an entirely different state. I was on planes. I had a lot of responsibility. I just recently gotten promoted. All these things were happening to me, but no one could see what was happening to me on the inside. Right. Like
Mm.
it's always, when it comes to work, and this is just culture at work overall, not just one company. There's
Yep.
a lot of pressure there too, right? To produce. And it wasn't in me. Right. So you're talking about how it influenced my career and changed things for me. From that moment, if I had to go back, like I would have taken way more time off, explored all
Mm.
options to not have been working because my mind wasn't just in it anymore, right? And when you're not there mentally, you're just a body there just hanging out. Like I needed to be in there, but to me, there are more important things sometimes at work, and no one sees
Wow.
what happens to us when we have to process all of this. So I would have taken more time off. I would have done things a little bit more differently. Um, and now I'm also very self-aware of those mistakes. And I tell people who are going through the same thing now, like if you're experiencing a loss, especially a loss as big as your parents,
Mm.
because
Yes.
see, if you are someone of younger age, like we are, like myself at 31, you
Mhm.
do not expect your parents to be gone at that age. You expect your
Oh,
parents to, when you're in your 50s, 60s, at that point, like, they're much older. You do not expect that to happen when you're young. So your experiences are way different. Every holiday, even when I go to events and I meet other people, there are still people asking me, oh, where are your parents at now and all these things. And I have to keep explaining to them. And then you see the shock and the look on their faces. And I'm like, this is life. You just never know what anyone's going through.
preach. Oh my god. You said so much, my brain is exploding. That was like, wow, I definitely resonate with all of what you said, and I think kind of just bringing it back to work, we're seeing a lot of workplaces really transform right now. We're seeing just the landscape of work and anything that revolves work is really transforming, right? Like people are pushing to work remotely, people want to move all over the country or go to different countries, like everything is changing tech-wise. AI is really present in the world. But one thing that's really stood out to me and how this relates to grief is I actually recently left my job, my corporate position. And a lot of it had to deal with my grief because of all the layoffs that were happening. And I didn't realize it until after I resigned, but it felt like there was a lot of survivor's guilt that was happening. And I already have a lot of survivor's guilt because of all the loss that I've endured. And so it felt like, even though these people are very much well alive, thank goodness, you know, the fact that some people were laid off, even not even at the company I was working at, but just across the board, right? You're just seeing
Yeah.
all of these folks get impacted and like having to figure out what they're going to do. And a lot of employees and colleagues didn't have the chance to say goodbye because their access got shut off immediately. And so that happened so much around that time, especially at the company I was at, that it really triggered something in me, and, like, my mental health was not okay, and so I kinda had to make that executive decision with myself and my family, like, "Look, I need to leave this job, I need to take some time for myself," and at that time, I actually just attended a funeral for my great tia who passed away, and I hadn't seen my father's family in years. So it brought up a whole bunch of trauma and things. And so at that time, that was just the best thing I could do at that time. And so I think it's really important to talk about that because, even what you're saying, even when you're in the job that you're in and you're experiencing a loss, like a death loss, people don't really know what to do. Sometimes people avoid you and they don't know what to ask. They don't know how to approach you. And then you feel an obligation to kind of like, it's okay. My parents died, or my father died. We can talk about it, or I'm gonna take some time off. Or in your case, you probably felt guilty about taking time off because in our culture, it's like ingrained you have to work twice as hard as our white counterparts, so we can't afford to take as much rest, right? And so all of those things really resonated with me, with what you were sharing. So I don't know if you want to respond to any of that and anything stood out to you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up that point because when we think about grief, we go straight to the loss of someone physically,
Yeah.
and especially like losing like a loved one, but grief it can come in all different types of sizes, shapes, and forms, and I
Mhm.
think it's if even if you look, for example, pets, right? Grieving over a pet is the same emotion.
Oh,
I
yeah.
can tell you this going through 3, 4 cycles of this now. Like I also like so people who grieve over pets, by the way, have the same feelings as if you're grieving over a loved one. Now there
Ab
might be different levels of, just how strong you may feel, but overall it's the same
absolutely.
process you need to go. You need to accept, right, what's happening. You need to understand, you need to take time. And I think the same applies for the loss of something that changes your life too as a job does. Uh,
Mhm.
I also got laid off. I got laid off from Twitter. I was working at Twitter for the past 2 years, and I was fortunate to land another job, but at the same time, a lot of, emotions that you mentioned were happening too. It's just as, like, you start thinking about everything from, "Am I a failure? Could I have done
Mhm.
something differently? Why me? Why us? Why this time?" Right? And you just start doubting yourself. Imposter syndrome starts creeping in, and then you see all your other friends as well get affected by things we can't control in the economy, and you just look at, "Wow, we did all of this to make it up here," right? And now we're just back at the bottom. Everyone's looking for a new job. Like those processes and the layoff journey is an entirely like
Oh,
legit
yeah.
feeling that we don't talk enough about. It is part of grief too. But I
Mhm.
will say this, I will say this because to all of those things I just pointed, here's
Yeah.
something that I personally have come to realize, and I think others who have also experienced loss, when they look at the situation of a layoff, when they look at the situation of losing something even tangible, like, losing your wallet, losing, having a house robbery, whatever situation, right?
Right.
I do believe that because we have experienced significant loss in our lives, that we become stronger and
Mhm.
stronger over time. And
Yes.
even when I was laid off, the first thing I said was that, all right,
Yeah.
I'm laid off. It's going to be hard. It's going to
Yeah.
be a wild adventure to find something new, but there's nothing that's going to compare to what I've already had to deal with personally.
Mhm.
And nothing's going to stop me in trying to land that next opportunity. Whereas in someone who might be experiencing loss for the first time, and it might not be physical loss, it might be the loss of a job that was part of someone's identity who has not
Yes.
experienced maybe significant losses in their lives from loved ones and such in the past, is probably going to go through a very, very hard and difficult time,
Mm.
depending on their finances and all of these things. And they should have a right to process that time and do what's best for them
Absolutely.
as well. But I do believe that it does make you stronger for the next time because no job is going to be guaranteed forever. And
Mm.
no one's life is guaranteed forever, and our lives aren't guaranteed forever either. So
Yeah.
we need to all understand that when loss comes, we process it, we give it time, we heal at our own pace, and it will make you stronger each time. There
Mhm,
are now, I don't know if this is the same for you, but
mhm,
there are a lot of people who now come to me, whether
mhm.
it's family or friends, who are starting to lose, unfortunately, lose their loved ones, parents, cousins, whoever it might be, and they
That's
ask like, "So what advice would you give? What do I do?" And those are the type of messages. I don't care what I'm doing. I drop everything and I'm like, "Let's talk about it now."
amen. Absolutely. Oh my gosh, 100,000%. I felt that in my soul. And, like, what you said too about, losing a job or, like, going through any hardship now, considering all of the other hardships you've already experienced, I've always labeled my grief as a blessing and a curse, right? It's obviously a curse because I would never wanna lose my dad, I would never wanna lose my best friend who passed, like, I would never want you to have experience or anyone to have experienced the loss they have. However, I also feel in that it has provided me, tools to deal with really hard times, and that's what I have called grief sense my whole life. I didn't have a word to assign this feeling. I'm like, "Okay, I know I'm sad and I've experienced this loss, but why do I feel more fuel to keep going? Why do I feel excitement to live my life?" And, obviously I have those hard days, but grief sense to me is like, okay, you understand the things that you've been through, but now you're going to use this as fuel to be better, to maybe inspire other people along the journey and just to live a full life. Because, like you said, we don't have all the time. We can pass tomorrow for all we know. I hope we don't, knocking on wood, but tomorrow could be our last day. It could be the last day of our loved ones. And so that's why I think it's important to, like, why why care what anyone else says? At the end of the day, we have to do the things that make us happy, that gives us life, and at the end of the day, I'm doing everything I do to honor the memory of my loved ones. So I could really care less about what other people have to say on, like, the decisions I make. Like, yes, I do value my family's opinions and my friends' opinions, but the world of social media, everyone's gonna have something to say on what you do. And so, that's why I really admire how open and vulnerable you are with your story. So, um, but
Don't
as we just
forget,
yeah, go ahead.
don't forget that it's as much about you as well because you
Sure.
need to heal, but also you
Yeah.
need to do what you can to enjoy your moments
Amen.
on the in this world because see, that's something that I realized younger because I was 19 when I first lost my father. And with my mom being only 51 years old when she passed away, I
Wow.
I just look back at that and and I say, I'm sure if my mom was still alive right now and I went to her and I said, how do you look back at your past 50 years of your life and like you happy with it, right? I'm sure she would say yes, 100%.
Yeah.
But I also know that there's a lot of things that she did not get to do. There's a
Yeah.
lot of because of financial problems, because of taking care of family, because of raising her children, and it could have been so different. And many of us are blessed to have our resumes and have experiences in these jobs and places in these
Yeah.
platforms. And when I see someone who's overworking or doing things that are just affecting your time on this planet in a sense of is this making you happy or not? Right. So when people are like, oh, I don't want to save, I don't want to go on vacation right now. It's gonna cost too much money. I'm like, well, tomorrow's not guaranteed. Next year's not guaranteed either. Like if I want to go and I have the ability to go and it's free for 2 weeks and I'm free, I can make some time off. I'm gonna go
Right.
enjoy this right now. And those are
And
the
like,
things that like
yep.
yeah, like you
Yeah.
need to also take care of you and live life to the fullest. And that's something that like I would recommend so highly for anyone going through loss too. Like you're gonna have your moments where it's gonna be
Right.
up and down, but don't forget to take care of yourself and do things that you love to do.
Oh my goodness. You just have all the gems. I love it. I wanted to give you the opportunity to share something with the people. And this kind of goes alongside honoring our loved ones, keeping memories, keeping objects maybe that remind us of our loved ones. But also, this is something I think is super important that I'm trying to do with the grief sense community is that, hey, when we are going through tough times in our life or we're going through things that simply just don't make sense, right? But we can use things like writing or doing creative, expression to kind of make sense of the things that we're going through. And so I want to turn that over to you because I think you had something that you'd like to share that kind of speaks to that.
Yeah, I there's one piece, and thank you for the overview. There are certain things that we keep. Many people do this where when we lose someone significant, we want to hold on to certain items. And I certainly have. I have my mother's last Christmas dress she had on. I have
Mm,
that still in my closet, wrapped up. I have one of my dad's t-shirts, his favorite shirt, still in my closet. His hats, right? Like, and these are just clothes, but they mean much more than that to me personally. And
absolutely.
I I think one of the ways we cope with loss is by holding on to certain things that mean the most to us about them. And that could be in the form of writing, stories, material things as well, memories, like so much. So I have a few things, but for today's purpose, I actually have a poem that
Yes.
my so for context, my father, who was born and raised in Puerto Rico, in San Lorenzo, he and a lot of my family still there on the island as well. So shout out to all of them. My father back in 1977, way back then, living on the island, wrote a book of poems that were
Wow.
focused around his life and at the time what was happening in the world too. And I wanted to just share one of the poems that he wrote and just explain what it means to me.
Absolutely.
All right, so we'll pull this up real quick. The book, by the way, that he wrote is called Poesías Borinqueñas, which in other words means Puerto Rican poetry.
Mhm.
I'm going to read both the Spanish and then the English translation. So
Love
in
it.
Spanish, the title is No soy nada de esto. El científico prueba y yo pruebo. El profesor enseña y yo enseño. El gobernante gobierna y yo gobierno, sin ser nada de eso. Soy solo un aprendiz cualquiera, que prueba, que enseña y que gobierna. Mas no soy de ninguna de esa espera. Científico, porque pruebo la comida. Profesor, porque enseño a mis hijos. Y gobierno lo mío a mi medida.
Mm.
So in English, this means I'm not any of this. A scientist performs tests, and so do I. A teacher teaches, and I also teach. A governor governs, and I do too, without being in any of the roles above. I'm an apprentice who can perform tests, teach, and govern. I'm a scientist because I test food. I'm a teacher because I have to teach my kids, and I govern my life at my own pace.
Wow.
So I
Literally,
shared,
wow. It like literally describes grief sense in a nutshell as well. I love it. So what would you say, your thoughts? Like how do you feel reading that? Like what do you take away from your father's message?
there's a few things. I think number one, my dad wrote this in 1977.
Mhm.
So I think about how relevant these words are still to today's worlds, and especially as being first generation for all the things that we go through in our community and are still going through.
Right.
for number two, I think about how smart and wise he was, because he was about 28, 29, 30-ish years old when he first wrote this. And I also realized that I'm 31 and I'm in the same age category that he wrote this. So it just
Wow.
really tells me that if my dad at that time, before the internet ever was a thing, before social media, just the world, just on the island in the hot, sunny weather and in Puerto Rico, and how much he loved the island, and he was able to come up with these expressions and y- without me knowing every single detail, because parents don't even tell you everything that went on in their lives. And
Yep.
without knowing everything he's gone through, I do have this, and I have other poems that he has written in which I can put myself and try to put myself in his shoes and
Mm,
realize what he was going through in that moment in time.
wow.
And now it's really cool also to look at, we're in 2023. This was in
Mhm.
1977, and we're
Wow.
still going through the same things. And his bigger message behind this is that I don't need to have this title. I don't need to be known as a teacher or a governor. I don't have to have this title to be able to make an impact. Like, I will make an impact my own way in my own time. And I'm already having these qualities in life and in wisdom. And it relates so much to his life as someone who wasn't able to graduate high school, wasn't able to go to college. He
Yeah.
never had any of that high education, but
Yeah.
he was really good at what he did, and he was really good at landscaping, very creative, an amazing father for my entire life, essentially, and really taught me a lot about humanity in the world, and really caring and being more spiritually connected to people, and just really just having that overall passion that no matter what people tell you, you can do something. So at the end of the day, when I was young and throughout my entire time, I still remember him always constantly telling me, like, you don't have to be me. You could be better. You can do
Mm,
things a different way. Like, go out
I love
there,
that.
show up, and just be who you're meant to be. And those are the things that I carry on.
Ugh, I love that. It kinda also reminds me of one of, Toni Morrison's core messaging. We actually did this in the Obama Foundation. They always told us about it, was to lead where you are. You don't need to lead, or do community organizing on a national, global scale. You can have as much impact where you are with the tools you do have. So that was just, super powerful. And I just wanna close with, one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast was to kind of give people the platform to not only obviously, honor people that have transitioned, but to hold space to talk about how these things affect us, how they show up in our, even if, the loss occurred several years ago or even just 1 year ago, like how it's shaping us, right? We're evolving constantly. But a really critical reason for me as well is because, my loss, my grief story starts with my father, and my father passed at 21 years old, and I'm 27, outliving my own dad. You're 31, outliving both your parents and other family members, right? Like, that's so wild to really sit down and think about. But one of the things, I guess, in my experience, I literally have nothing from my father, nothing. I have maybe 3 to 4 pictures, but I don't really have clothing or items or anything, and so this podcast is a way for me to give the gift that I didn't have growing up, to kinda have, let's say in the future when we pass away, this could be a gift that we can give to our loved ones, right? Like, it's art that outlives us, so no matter when we pass, this podcast will be out there in the world, and people can just pull up this video or the audio, and they can listen to our voice. Like, what a gift, And so I wanna continue to do that, and so with that, I really just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for contributing to that gift and for also sharing your story, being so open. It really means the world to me that, this is not like your typical podcast. We're
Mhm.
talking about really deep stuff here, but I think the deeper we get, the better it is. The more we talk about death, the more we talk about our loss, the more we talk about the things that we usually don't talk about, the more present we can be in our lives. And that's really what Grief Sense is all about. And I've seen that show up in your life and in our interactions. And yeah, I'm just honored to know you, to collaborate with you, and yeah.
I just want to thank you for this platform and allowing me to come on and share my story. I'm looking so much forward to hearing the stories of others because we all process grief and loss in so many different ways. And I
Yeah.
haven't done enough either myself to just be able to listen and hear the stories of others. And we'll find out that we have a lot more in common than we
Mhm.
think, each and every day. And if someone I openly am sharing and I share with people, and I use the term adult orphan in my case,
Mhm.
just very open. And to some people, it might be like, oh my God, that's very like,
Yep.
dark and all that. I'm like, no, no, this is the reality. This
Yep.
is the truth. But one thing that I'm not going to do is not be there for my parents in the ways that I can now. And that is showing and sharing their memories while leaving an impact at the same time. So for anyone who's out here listening and thinking, well, what's next? Well, what's next is you have the ability to
Right.
still show the impact that any of these family members, loved ones had on your lives by continuing to share their memories and thinking about the happy times and even the sad times, the bad times, or just remembering that you're here, enjoy your time here. But it does not mean you can't have days too where you're looking back and it's okay to cry and it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be depressed. It's okay to feel a
Yes.
certain way. For about 3, 4 years, I hated going for anywhere for Thanksgiving, anywhere for Christmas holidays, Mother's Day, Father's Day, all of these things to me now mean different than they meant like 10, 15, 20 years ago. But I
Mhm.
now use it in a way to say, you know what? I am going to show love to everyone else who's celebrating. And then one day when and if I have kids, I hope to be able to be that spiritual person for them too, and to let him or her know that it's okay to grieve and know that you're going to be stronger from it as well.
Grief Sense Familia. That wraps up another episode of the Grief Sense podcast. If this resonated with you, please feel free to share with someone who will appreciate it and tell a friend to tell a friend. Also, I'm a firm believer that feedback is a gift. So, I'm just saying, I won't be mad if you decide to leave a review and a rating of your experience on the podcast so far. Also, let's help each other find community in grief and let's amplify these stories far and wide. Thank you for tuning in. En solidarity y con mucho amor, Mimi.